one of many we've taken part in over here at Harrogate Library. My name's Danny Crowe. We are going to be having an interesting, in-depth discussion, very informal chat about new destinations, which is about the settings within fiction. First of all, this is Karen Perkins, largely a writer of paranormal and historical fiction. She's an award-winning author. The Yorkshire Ghost Story series, which is divided into the Haworth hauntings.
Yes, so there's Ghosts of Haworth, Ghosts of Knaresborough and Ghosts of Force Cross.
And there's the Valkyrie series, which is the Caribbean pirate adventures. Look Sharp, Ill Wind and Dead Reckoning. And not content with all of that, she's also an editor and author of a multiple writing guide series called Lionheart,
yes.
Yeah. So where are you at right now? This is a big history of work behind you.
It is. My first book I published in 2012. I've now published 8 fiction books and 3 of the publishing guides. And I've also helped over 600 books become published through my editing work and formatting, including the Kindle Storyteller winner, first one. So books I've edited are award winners as well.
Congratulations.
My first ghost story, The Haunting of Force Cross, which is set up at Thrust Cross, which is a place that's very dear to my heart. That won an award which actually took me to New York to a red carpet, which was amazing.
So sitting next to you is Angela Wren.
Hello.
And I believe that rural French detective fiction is the sort of world we're in here, is that right?
That's right, yes.
And you've also written plays and radio plays.
Yes, yeah, a couple of one-act plays that were recorded for the radio and news. So yes, that was a few years ago.
The books centre in the setting of the Cevennes. Is that Cevennes, which is a mountain range. It's a mountain range in south central France, and there are 3 books within the series so far.
Yes, the first book took me 4 years really in total to write.
Okay.
But of course, once you get a publisher, they say, "Oh, where's the next one coming?" Then,
Yeah.
so you're kind of pushed along a bit. And I don't just write; I also work at a local theatre.
Right.
So I kind of fit my writing in between all my theatre duties.
Next to Angela is Rachael Hardcastle, or Emma to her friends, and she is a writer of post-apocalyptic YA and high fantasy, and also adult fiction.
I suppose it's often described as death fantasy to some, what I write, so what happens when you die. So sort of the afterlife kind of, that sort of story. And that's mostly what I focus on.
Noah Finn and the Art of Suicide, yeah? That one there, okay. So, but previous to that, we have the Finding Pandora.
Yes,
which is
series of 4.
A series of 4. And Aeon Infinitum.
Aeon Infinitum.
Thought the French was going to be the difficult bit. So sitting next to Emma is Candy, and we go way back. We've done a lot of work together before. Some of the settings that Candy's worked in are local settings, so Yorkshire generally.
A Siberian forest village, this is true. Lenin's is Russia 200 years in the future, when there is no electronics at all, because no massive magnetic pulse from the sun has wiped out all electronics on Earth.
So I do notice that you have some connections to Russia within your family group.
Yes.
If that's fair to say.
My other half is Russian.
Yes. But is he Siberian?
No.
No. Quite often, when I think of my most favourite books, I think of the place they were set. Are there any books that have inspired you prior, perhaps, to starting your writing career, that the setting was really real and visceral, and you could really just put yourself in that place after you read that book?
For me, Wuthering Heights, probably no surprise to anybody who's read any of my books.
Absolutely.
I mean, that book would not be Wuthering Heights set in any other place in the world. and just the way the moors are evoked and the atmosphere and the weather and the accent and the mood. It just gives that depth to the book. It's almost a character in its own right and almost the main character.
Do you feel that the Hunger Games, though, opposite to that? When I read the Hunger Games, I imagined it pretty much as it was when they did the movie. So I was actually quite impressed with how they built the Hunger Games, for those that have probably read them, with the detail, and especially in the second movie with the way that the plot worked. I just thought that they got that right.
What you leave out of your setting, how you make the decisions about what you leave it in, what you leave to the reader's imagination to fill in the backgrounds. How do you do that?
I kind of just make a point of giving my readers little clues, really. My village, Missandriere, is actually a fictional place, but it's based on a real place that I have visited, and I spend 3 months of the year in France every year. To create Missandriere, obviously I used the French road names to give a feel for it. I didn't necessarily mention all of the trees in the wood or anything like that, but there is a dead oak which happens to be at the top of the real village. So I thought, oh yes, I'll have that, I'll just move it down the road a bit. And it's the same with the chateau. There is a chateau in the village, it's ruined, but it wasn't in the right place for my story, so I just moved it up the hill a bit. And it's just about giving readers clues, I think.
Right.
And I create the French feel by using French titles for things, French road names and so on. And I talk about Jacques travelling between various towns, and most of the towns and cities are actually real places, and I use some of the genuine streets in those towns and cities because I've walked those streets, so I feel I can do that.
So, for example, in the Parliament of Rooks set in Haworth, the prologue has the historical character Martha drawing water from the well, but to give the overview of Haworth, rather than big long descriptions, just describe the blood running down between the cobblestones from the slaughterhouse, which she then slips in. So it's very pertinent to the story and what's happening. So it moves the story along, and it gives a detail that otherwise would be lost.
Emma, you're big on world building, aren't you? To try and describe a planet is probably...
Yeah, I tend to go for what I think the reader needs to know. As a reader myself, what would I want to know if I was reading that book, and what would I think would be too much? What information about a setting would I skip? And that's what I tend to leave out. But for the Noah Finn book, which was set on 9/11 in New York, it was mostly as well not to insult the reader's intelligence, because we're all aware of 9/11. We can all imagine the New York skyline, and we all know there's an underground for New York that the trains run on. So that was pretty much all I focused on. It was the things that people already knew quite a lot about, so that there wasn't chunks of boring description telling them what they already know. But for world building, for post-apocalyptic and fantasy, I think you've got to give a little bit more, because this is a world that I might know in my mind really well. And in my imagination it's clear, and I can imagine every tree and every blade of grass, but that's in my head, and I've got to get other people to understand that and to see it as I see it.
To Petersburg, I sort of had to build from scratch, because I thought, well, maybe people haven't been there, they don't know what it looks like, they have other ideas. Because everybody thinks that Russia has been covered in snow all the time. Well, it's not. It has a summer. It has a summer that is hotter than our summer, if anything, or relatively very changeable. So I concentrated on the things which would appear in the story later. See, the Countess is walking down a broad boulevard in a light which we don't have here, which is the light of the midsummer night when it doesn't really get dark.
Yeah, you've got your worlds, your countries, your towns, then you've got your buildings, and you've got your smaller scale stuff, which would be decor and possessions and the minutiae.
So I write dual timeline novels mainly, so I have, and the place links both those timelines. So the modern timeline has to fit, it's a real place, it's inspired me to write about it and to write the stories there, and it has to be accurate. But then what do you do when you go into the past? it's still got to be the same place, so it's a lot of research to find out what was actually there then, that isn't there now, what is there now that wasn't where then. It's all got to match exactly, and actually the place, it does dictate how we live.
Like
There was a
that.
wonderful piece of advice that somebody was giving on Twitter recently, and they said you can have just one sentence that sums up a whole setting. An example they gave was a thin dog scratched in the dust, and it was a trailer park, you know, an American trailer park.
Yeah.
So that you've got the poverty, you've got the drought, you've got the, you know, real grapes and rot stuff, but in modern times, just in that one sentence, a thin dog scratched in the dust.
Weather seems to me to be one of those elements of setting which is important, but perhaps could be easily done badly.
She's a crime writer, and she was writing a book set in Peru, and she finished it and she was talking about editing it, and she read it through and thought, it's lacking something, and I can't think what it might be. And the publisher agreed with her and said, look, go to Peru, go there and feel what it's like. You know, maybe that's what's lacking. So she got on a plane and she went to Peru, and she landed at Lima Airport, and she stepped out of the plane, and she was violently sick and she passed out, because the thing that she'd forgotten was altitude.
That's what dominates my writing. I tend to be saying what I can see all the time. I don't tend to say what I can smell all the time. I imagine historical fiction is easier for that, is it?
It can be, but most of the smells are pretty disgusting, really. So it kind of have to be careful about where I use them in the book.
Yes.
So just things about the flowers or the plants, the smell of wild garlic, or the heather, or the clearing blows all those nasty smells out of the way and off.
Yeah.
I think the weather and how it happens in a particular location is really quite important. I mean, you think about my little village, which it sits 1,000 metres above sea level, and if you're still working feet and inches, then that kind of means it's actually like being at the top of Ben Nevis, but with better weather. Mm-hmm. You know, and having said that, the weather in the Savannah can change in an instant because it is an upland mountainous area. And thinking about it, my last book, I had a scene, it was actually on a Friday evening, where it had been a very hot, sultry day, and that evening, and this is June, end of June, they had an enormous hailstorm. And so I wrote it, and this was something that actually happened to me about 3 or 4 years ago. So I'd lived through it, I'd understood it, and I'd been really quite frightened by the storm that we weathered. So I'd written it all into this scene. I thought, oh yeah, this is great. It's a great backdrop for the conversation that's actually going on. When it came back from my editor, it had all been red penned.
Oh, really?
So I sent her a note saying,
did you blue pen the red pen?
No, I didn't. I didn't do anything with it. I just put it at the top of the scene. I have actually lived through this storm.
Yes. How can your setting change your mind about what's going to happen in your plot?
Okay, well, for Aeon Infinitum, that one is set in the future, and it's when the world has stopped turning, and so we're in a 6 month of darkness, 6 months of hot temperatures, and it takes place in snow, so it's basically the characters have come out tight and they're forced to explore the Harmony Grid, and I used the weather and the conditions and the setting against them to make their lives hell, because there would be no story unless I did that. So yeah, and so I just used the setting and the ruins that they passed through and just the details around them and the temperature and what would happen if they fell through a frozen lake, and how would they have to then cope with being freezing and cold all the time and not having the ability to warm up and go inside and get a cup of tea.
What is it that draws you to particular time periods?
Something about it, something happens in that time that's grabbed my attention, and I just want to know more about it. For the Valkyrie series with Panama and Massachusetts Bay Colony and Caribbean, it was the idea, the piracy, because I grew up sailing. When I was 10 years old, I had a little black and white skull and crossbones at the top of my mast. And it fascinated me, and as I grew older and started to understand, actually there were people went to the Caribbean and to North America to look for a better life, to look for freedom, and they enslaved 2 continents while they did it. The most democratic society at that time was aboard a pirate ship. Everybody had a vote. everybody, they even had health insurance, yet it was still the most brutal place to live. And it's that dichotomy, those opposites, really, that really fascinate me, and I try to get to the root of and just try to understand. It's a way of trying to understand human nature, really. Looking at the past is easier than looking at today.
I've read The Price of Time. Would you just hold that up, the book up? This is her sort of debut novel, The Price of Time. And in there was a particular setting which sort of amazed me. So in there is a chapter which is set in the architecture of a character's mind.
Oh, yes, yes.
And although I didn't want to trip anyone up with difficult questions too much, I couldn't resist.
I am literally so glad you asked me that question.
Oh, great. Fire away.
Because it's the one destination that we haven't talked about. Your mind is a landscape. It's got things in it. It's got mechanisms in it. It's literally in a space. And there are Americans now who say, well, we've explored, a bit of outer space. What about the space between the ears? How little do we know that? How little do we know what consciousness is made out of? We don't know how a person perceives time.